Miss Turner, why don't you show the class how smart you really are? The words hit like a dare, cold, calculated, echoing across the silent math classroom of Linwood Middle School in Cedar Falls, Indiana. All heads turned toward the back row, where a quiet, awkward girl sat hunched over her desk, fingers clenched around a pencil like it was a lifeline. Emma Turner didn't speak, didn't move. Not at first. She was used to disappearing, practiced at it even. You don't grow up invisible without learning how to stay that way. But something was different this time, something in the air, in the tension. And then she stood up, slowly, quietly, as if pushed by something deep within. Not rage, not pride, but purpose. And the room froze. Thank you for being here. Sometimes the smallest moments carry the greatest meaning. Today's story is one of those, quiet, powerful, and worth remembering. If it touches your heart, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you'd like more stories like this, you're warmly invited to subscribe and tap the bell so you won't miss the next one. Now, let's take a closer look at what really happened. Emma Turner had a habit of not being noticed. She wasn't shy exactly, more like deliberately quiet. At 12, she had already mastered the skill of blending in. No bright colors, no raised hand, no eye contact. At Linwood Middle School, invisibility was her armor. And room 14B, her 7th grade math class, was her favorite place to wear it. Every morning, Emma sat in the same chair, third row from the back, right next to the heating vent that buzzed faintly during colder months. She always arrived a few minutes early, pulled out her worn spiral notebook, and began doodling. But they weren't cartoons or flowers. They were equations. Complex ones. Stuff most kids wouldn't see until high school, maybe college. She loved math the way some kids loved music. Not for the grades, for the rhythm, the pattern, the elegant click of numbers falling into place. Her notebook margins were filled with proofs, graphs, and side problems she never showed anyone. Not even her parents. Because Emma had learned something early on, being different drew attention, and attention was dangerous. Her teacher, Mrs. Harriet Colton, couldn't have been more opposite. At 41, Mrs. Colton was a woman of order, deadlines, and authority. She kept her graying hair pulled into a tight bun, wore flat shoes that clicked ominously on the linoleum, and maintained a legendary reputation across Linwood's hallways. She wasn't mean exactly, just unyielding. Her philosophy on education was simple. If you're not struggling, you're not learning. And to her, struggle came with sound, recitation, response, raised hands, performance. Quiet kids like Emma, they made her nervous. So, on that particular Tuesday morning in early October, when the room buzzed with whispers and the bell rang late, Mrs. Colton had already decided she'd had enough. She didn't greet the class. She didn't pass out warm-up worksheets. She slapped a stack of papers onto the desk with a sharp smack, and the room fell silent. "This," she said, holding one up, "is basic algebra, basic. And yet half of you still don't understand it." Her voice cut through the chatter like a blade. "I've taught this unit for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And you're still staring at variables like they're alien symbols." The students stared at their desks. No one made a sound. Not even Tyler Mason, who usually cracked a joke by now. Mrs. Colton's gaze swept the room like a lighthouse beam cold. Searching. Math isn't magic, people. It's logic. Rules. If you don't learn to apply them now, you will fail. Not just this class, high school, sets, college, life. Lo, she paused. Then her eyes landed on Emma, and something changed in her posture. "Miss Turner." Emma's spine straightened without permission. "You've been very quiet this week." Emma swallowed. She could feel the weight of 22 pairs of eyes sliding toward her. "I assume that means you've mastered the material." Her stomach turned. This wasn't a compliment. It was a spotlight. Mrs. Colton turned to the whiteboard and began scribbling. Not a simple warm-up problem. Not even a midterm review. What she wrote was complex, long. An equation with exponents, nested parentheses, and square roots. One Emma recognized from a college prep textbook she'd snuck from the public library's back shelf. Gasps fluttered through the room. "What is that?" someone whispered. "Is she serious?" "Looks like," Johnny said, but Mrs. Colton wasn't listening. She stepped back, capped the marker, and gestured toward the board. Emma, please. Show us how it's done. Emma didn't move. She stared at the equation like it was a cliff edge, and she'd just been asked to jump. Her heart thudded, her palms sweated, her pencil slipped between her fingers and clattered to the floor. Any time now, Mrs. Colton said, folding her arms. Unless you'd prefer a calculator. Laughter flickered around the room. Emma slowly rose. Not because she wanted to, because something in her refused to sit still. The same something that filled her notebooks. That whispered numbers when she walked home. That saw patterns in clouds and staircases and the spacing of fence posts. She picked up a piece of chalk. It was smoother than she expected, cooler, and she walked, silently, to the board. Behind her, the room quieted, not out of respect, but suspense. Nobody expected her to solve it, least of all the teacher. Emma took one long look at the equation, and in her mind it unfolded. Emma stood before the board, and the world narrowed. Not to silence, but to focus. Every number on the whiteboard flickered in her brain like a constellation, each connected to the next by invisible lines only she could see. The equation wasn't a monster. It wasn't chaos. It was a puzzle, and Emma had been solving puzzles since before she could tie her shoes. She didn't hear the whispers behind her. Didn't see Mrs. Colton's brow twitch or the smirk tugging at Tyler's mouth. She was somewhere else now, deep inside her own head, her own rhythm. She picked up the marker and started. At first, no one moved. A few students exchanged glances. One boy near the back snorted. Random guesswork. But then, her hand moved again. And again. Her strokes were confident, sharp, deliberate. She wasn't guessing. She was dismantling the equation, step by step, like a surgeon separating nerves from sinew. Her handwriting wasn't perfect, but the numbers didn't care. The logic was there. The rhythm, the precision, and that rhythm began to hypnotize the room. Even the laughter stopped. Mrs. Colton had folded her arms. Now she unfolded them. She took a small step forward and blinked. The markers in her hand clinked quietly against her bracelet. Emma was halfway through now, converting the expression, simplifying, factoring, doing in real time what most of them couldn't even process on paper. Her eyes narrowed at one term, paused, adjusted. She scratched something out, rewrote it cleanly, kept going. Her breathing was steady, not rushed, not nervous, just present. By now, every desk had gone still. Kids leaned forward. Some squinted, others stared open-mouthed. No one was mocking her now. Emma didn't even seem aware of them. She wasn't doing this to impress anyone. She was doing it because it made sense. Because the equation called out to her. Because solving it felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. And when she reached the final line, she didn't celebrate. She circled her answer, stepped back, and quietly put the cap back on the marker. The board was filled with symbols. Her symbols. Lines of logic, of brilliance, of truth. Emma turned slowly, chalk dust on her fingertips, ink smudged on her wrist, and faced the room. Her classmates stared at her. Mrs. Colton hadn't moved. "Miss Turner," she said finally, her voice softer now, how did you know how to do that?" Emma didn't answer at first. She glanced down at her hands. Then quietly, "I studied." Mrs. Colton blinked. "On your own?" And Emma nodded. "I like math." A ripple moved through the class, the kind that usually follows a fire drill or a surprise test. But this wasn't shock. This was recognition. For the first time, her classmates saw her, really saw her. Not as that quiet girl, not as a shadow, but as something else. Something sharp, powerful, brilliant. Mrs. Colton walked to the board, her heels softer now. She scanned Emma's solution, traced the logic. Her fingers hovered over the symbols like she was touching something sacred. Finally, she stepped back. "Class," she said, "what you've just seen isn't just the right answer. It's exceptional. This solution shows understanding far beyond anything we've studied." Her voice cracked a little, but she steadied it. "This is what brilliance looks like. This is what happens when someone stops hiding and starts stepping forward." Emma's cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to compliments. Certainly not from teachers. She returned to her seat slowly, her hands still a little shaky. But the look on her face, it wasn't fear. It was something else. The beginning of pride. When the bell rang that afternoon, it sounded different. It still echoed through the halls like always, but in room 14B, nobody moved right away. Not even Mrs. Colton. Not even Emma. The students sat frozen, half-packed, half staring at the board still filled with Emma's work. Untouched, uncorrected, perfect. Mrs. Colton stood beside her desk, arms folded, face unreadable. But her eyes hadn't left Emma's seat once since the applause died down. Her usual commanding air was quieter now. Almost unsure. "Emma," she called, just as the scraping of chairs began. Emma looked up, startled. "Could you stay for a moment?" And just like that, the chatter in the room doubled. "Oh, ooh. She's in trouble? No way. She crushed it. She's like a math witch or something." Emma stayed seated, clutching her notebook as the last of her classmates filed out, many sneaking sideways glances on their way. The door clicked shut, and it was just the two of them. Mrs. Colton crossed the room, not with her usual clipped steps, but something slower. Measured, she leaned gently against her desk. Then, after a pause, she spoke. "I owe you something." Emma blinked. "What?" Mrs. Colton inhaled, exhaled. "An apology." Emma stared, unsure if she'd heard right. Mrs. Colton continued. "I misjudged you. I assumed you were just quiet, disengaged. I thought maybe you were coasting through my class." She looked down. Her voice softened. "I was wrong." And Emma's fingers dug into the edge of her notebook. No teacher had ever said those words to her before. Not like that. Not without hesitation. Not without defensiveness. Mrs. Colton looked back up. "You're extraordinary. And I didn't see it. That's my failure, not yours." Emma didn't know what to say. Her mouth moved slightly, but no words came. Then quietly, "I didn't think anyone would care." Silence settled between them. Mrs. Colton nodded slowly. "Well, you were wrong about that too." She smiled, not broadly, not with performative praise, but with something gentler, realer. "I want to help you, Emma, if you'll let me. There are programs out there, math leagues, scholarships, competitions. Things that would actually challenge you, not bore you." Emma looked down at her hands. Her fingers were still a little dusty from the chalk. Her heart was still thudding in her chest, but something else pulsed behind it, possibility. That night, at the dinner table, she told her parents. Not everything, but enough. She told them how she solved an equation even her teacher didn't expect her to understand. How the class watched in silence. How, for the first time, she felt like her mind wasn't something to hide, but something worth sharing. Her mother reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "We always knew," she said, smiling through a shimmer of tears. Her father added quietly, "I'm glad they're finally starting to see." Later, in her room, Emma opened her notebook, not to solve a problem, to start something. For the first time, the blank page didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a beginning. She uncapped her pen and began writing not just numbers, ideals, dreams, because something inside her had collapsed. Not her confidence, not her fear, but the wall she'd built around her brilliance. The rest of the week was a blur. Emma walked the halls of Linwood Middle School like a ghost slowly becoming visible. Students nodded at her now, some smiled. A few even asked for help, casually, awkwardly, as if they weren't sure how to approach someone who had just turned their assumptions inside out. She wasn't used to the attention, but she wasn't shrinking from it either. Not anymore. During lunch, someone from her class slid into the seat across from her. Sophia Jennings, the girl who always wore loud earrings and louder opinions. "That thing you did in math," she said, picking at her sandwich, "was insane." Emma blinked. Sophia looked up. "Like insanely good. You made it look easy." Emma didn't know what to say, so she just nodded. "I didn't even know you could talk," Sophia added. Emma laughed. Just once, a quiet exhale. "Me neither," she said. Back in room 14B, things changed too. Mrs. Colton didn't treat her like a prodigy. She didn't gush, but she did challenge her. She began leaving additional problems at Emma's desk. Subtle, quiet, a nod instead of a command. And every time Emma solved one, a small smile flickered on her teacher's face. The kind that said, "I see you now." One day, Mrs. Colton handed her a flyer. It was for the Indiana Junior Mathematics Invitational. "You should think about it," she said. As if it were just a suggestion, Emma folded the paper and slipped it into her notebook. Later at home, she unfolded it again. And this time she actually read it. She didn't make a decision right away. The idea of standing on a stage, competing, being seen, still terrified her. But something had shifted. It was no longer just about fear. It was about choice. Before that day, she never thought she had one. Now she knew better. Emma's story isn't about a gifted child solving a hard problem. It's about what happens when someone stops hiding who they are. It's about the courage it takes to stand up. Not to prove someone wrong, but to prove yourself right. It's about a teacher realizing she'd overlooked something brilliant. It's about a classroom learning that quiet doesn't mean small, and silence doesn't mean less. So, what about you? What's the thing you've kept to yourself, not because it isn't special, but because you were afraid no one would care? What if you're wrong? What if the world needs exactly what you're hiding? Maybe it's time to stop folding your brilliance into margins. Maybe it's time to pick up the chalk. Emma Turner never shouted for attention. She never asked to be seen. But when the moment came, when the world turned toward her, not with applause but with doubt, she chose to stand. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. And in doing so, she reminded us of something we often forget, that some of the brightest lights shine the quietest. That greatness doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it hides. And sometimes, all it takes to change everything is one moment of courage. So if you've been hiding your gift, your idea, your voice, your story, maybe it's not because the world doesn't care. Maybe it's because you've been too careful to share it. And maybe now is the time. If Emma's story touched something in you, we'd love to hear it. Tell us in the comments. What's the one thing you've kept to yourself? What's your chalk on the board moment? And if you want more stories like this, quiet, powerful, and real, we warmly invite you to subscribe and tap the bell. It means more than you know. Because here we believe everyone has a story worth remembering. Even, especially, the ones that begin in silence. Thank you for being here.